Whoa! All right, we're jumping into another episode of CAS Minute here, and today we're going to talk about objection handling in the sales process. So we've already walked through the challenger sale, we've walked through story branding and a couple ways that you can manage a sales process, but inevitably in any sales process, you are going to face objections. So how do we understand common objections? How do we frame our services in light of addressing those objections? We're going to walk through a couple of ways that you can handle that. So first, let's talk about pricing. Hey, your services are too expensive. That's going to be one of the most common objections you face in selling your services. Or hopefully you do. If you're not, you're probably priced too low. So here, it's really easy to say, hey, well, the cost of a full-time employee is $75,000 or $100,000 a year, but our service is only $50 or $60, or maybe even $30 or $40. Now, I don't think that is a fair retort to make. When you think about that comparison, generally, the internal analysis for the client is not, I'm going to hire a full-time employee or I'm going to have an outsourced service. It's generally comparing outsourced services against one another. So creating that comparison of an FTE, hiring an internal accountant, is generally not the right comparison to make. So what I want to lean into here is, what is the value we're providing? How are you going to improve the outcomes of your client? Oftentimes that's, hey, let's save you time so you can focus on other things in your business. But I would rather look at it through the lens of, how is the consistency and comparability of the financials? How is the internal operations and the finance function creating more scalability for the company? How are you demonstrating that value? So the next thing, when you think about providing that value equation and demonstrating ROI for your prospect, oftentimes another objection is going to be skepticism about that value. How is this service any better than what we currently have? You really need to think through, how are you differentiating your offerings and showing that tangible benefit to the client? So that could be something like, hey, here's the type of technology that we use. Here's the product that we create that we hand over to you at the end of the day. There's a variety of ways that you can do that, but ultimately you need to be very specific about that value equation for your client. Another way that clients will commonly object to CAS services is just fear of change. Hey, we're not really ready to switch providers or change up our processes. And so in order to mitigate those concerns about transition, process, and disruption, I think it's really important to hit on your process and how you manage the change, because that is a very difficult time for the client and for you. And so if you can very clearly and articulate how you walk through this process with prospects coming into the sales process, you really mitigate that fear of change. Another common objection that you might get is just perceived complexity. Hey, the service just seems a little bit complex or a little bit overwhelming. How are we going to work together? How's this going to operate in cadence while we're working together? So if you can take everything that you do for a client, from the month-end close process to the communication to the client expectations, and really simplify it to, this is how the burden on you, this is how easy it is to interact with us. Here's the process that we have to support you. Here's the means in which we accomplish work. If you can simplify that in a way that really allows them to understand how much time do they need to dedicate to it, what's their interface with this type of relationship, you can really start to ease the concern around the complexity. The last thing is just timing. You may get an objection on timing. Hey, we're not ready to make a decision right now. So on one hand, you can create urgency to help them understand why they need to make a decision right now. But then also you can take the inverse of that and say, hey, here's the cost actually to you if you take no action. And so timing can be one of those things that can be handled one of two ways. But generally, when you're going through these common objections to CAS, it's important that you have a really concise way to communicate back how you're dealing with those objections. So those are some really quick, high-level, easy examples to understand of common objections. I hope that's helpful. Till next time.